Gain Structure, the foundation of every mix.
Depending on the console you're working on, there is a generic knob that's usually located at the top of every mixer. Now this is either called gain, trim, input level, or just input. Let me tell you, this is where every good mix begins. On the Mackie mixer, the rotary pot is called a trim. By adjusting the pot either up or down, allows me to control the amount of audio level coming into the channel. Now what I've done is I've hooked up a source into channel 20 on this mixer. What I want to do is visually be able to see the amount of level coming in. I select the solo function located at the bottom of the channel, and now I can see on the meters the amount of audio coming into the channel. Going back to the trim, I raise it or lower depending on the audio coming in until I get it up to around 0. This is the ideal level of audio coming into the channel.
Unity gain is probably the most important thing to know about on a console. Unity means 1. So if you're multiplied by 1, you're not changing the level at all. So if you look on the faders at Unity gain, if you set the fader at Unity gain, the outputs at Unity gain, you're not changing the level anywhere through the console. So now if you go to the input of the board, turn up the input trim or the input attenuator, whatever it's called, until you get a hot signal coming out of the console, you've set the same signal level all the way through the board. And when you're designing a console, that Unity gain is where they designed it so it still has 20 dB of headroom left through the circuit, so you're not clipping. So you know that if the input of the board isn't clipping, you're not clipping anything else all the way through the board.
On the Yamaha, the rotary pot located at the top is called the gain. It does exactly the same thing as the trim and the Mackie, it's just named different. On the Mackie, in order for us to see the level of the audio coming into the channel, we selected the solo. On the Yamaha, we're going to select a switch called PFL. Now you're probably wondering, what does PFL stand for? PFL stands for pre-fade listen or pre-fade level, depending on how you use it. By selecting the PFL, I can see the amount of level coming into this channel on the meters. If I need to make any adjustments, I just adjust the gain located at the top of the channel. I want to use the Yamaha to make another point here. I have a source coming down channel 12. By selecting the PFL, I can see that the audio level is way too hot. This is called distortion or clipping. What I need to do is reduce the amount of gain coming into the channel. As I look at the gain though, it's all the way down and I can't lower it anymore. On this mixer, like some others, there's a switch called an attenuation pad. Now what this does is lowers the amount of audio coming into the channel by 20 dB before the preamp. Now I can easily adjust my gain to get the ideal amount of audio coming back into the mixer. If you've been in audio for a while, there's no doubt you've heard of the term unity. Unity and 0 are exactly the same thing on a console. Running your fader at 0 is the same thing as unity. Your console is going to sound and perform the best if you run your faders at or around 0 or unity.
One of the important things about gain structure is that if you have a proper gain ratio going through your console, you're going to get better signal to noise ratio. Your EQ will be more efficient because you've got decent signal going through the whole gain structure. A good way, if you have say a signal indicator per channel strip, is to keep your faders down, turn up your gain until that light is randomly peaking, and then possibly back it down slightly, because probably you can get away with the odd flash on that peak indicator. If you only have meters to work with, you can do the same thing with a PFL or a solo button. Figure out your gain and then back it down again. But it's really important to get lots of gain going through the console, because then your noise floor stays down, and then what you're sending to your amps or through your EQs or whatever your structure is will be much more clean, punchy, easy to deal with, and just help your whole sound.
Now what we want to do is route the audio from this channel over to the master fader located on the right hand side of this mixer. And what we do is very simple. First of all, make sure your solo is not selected. Now if you have a mute, make sure it's off. If you have an on switch, obviously make sure it's on. Now raise the master fader up to 0. Now slowly raise the fader of the channel you're working on until you achieve the desired level coming out of your speakers. Now you can see the LEDs show the amount of output leaving the console. Now the situation may arise sometimes where you can't even get this fader close to zero because the level coming out of the speakers is just way too loud. What you need to do is go to the power amplifiers and turn down the output so that you can get this fader up. I know your console will sound a lot better if you run the faders hot instead of down way too low. In reviewing the gain structure, the rotary pot usually located at the top of every mixer is called either gain, trim, input level, or just input. Rotating this pot increases or decreases the level coming into the channel. Depending on the console you have, by selecting either the solo, PFL, or Q switches, allows you to see the signal coming into the channel on the main meters. Selecting this feature also routes this particular channel to the headphone output. If you don't have meters on your console, you can adjust the gain until the peak light for that particular channel begins to flash, and then back off the gain until the peak light stops flashing. Some consoles have an attenuation switch, which lowers the audio by 20 dB before the preamp. This feature is used when the channel is clipping, even with the gain control all the way off. On switches, or mutes, turn the channels off or on. Unity and zero are the same thing. Remember, your console will sound the best with your faders at or around zero or unity.
One of my favorite road stories is we were on tour. I was out with Phil Kagi, just fabulous guitar player. And for whatever reason, the truck didn't show up or got broke down, and it had the full PA in it. It had the drummer's drums, but we had guitars and a bass and I think one keyboard and a Lindrum machine. And a fellow in the town, we weren't able to rent any PA. We were just stuck. A fellow in the town actually had a little cheesy PA system, high impedance. You couldn't do long runs. There was no snake. I ended up having to run sound sitting beside the drummer on the stage with these short little cable runs, a little maybe 8-channel mixer. And it was a great time. We made triggers for the drummer to play on, like books with pads, and something for him to stamp on for the kick drum. And we did a whole show like that. And the people loved it. It turned out great. The sound wasn't spectacular, but the music came through, and it turned out really well.